So I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking about something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. And that's the issue of, is apologetics really necessary? The idea is this, that we can somehow prove the faith or argue enough to somehow break somebody's, resistance down. And this is made even worse by popular apologetic writers who give a story of that one person who actually changed their mind. So then Christians read those books and they think, hey, that means I should go onto YouTube, take to social media, and do it without wisdom. And that's exactly what happens unfortunately. And it just kind of makes it where the faith seems a little bit more ridiculous and pointless discussions happen. And it begs the question. It causes us to really have an issue here. Is the study of apologetics really necessary? Is it something that's actually doing anybody any good? It kind of is a little bit concerning that out of all the books of the Bible, none of those books of the Bible are a strict theological book or a defense of the faith or that kind of stuff. I mean, it has some of that stuff in there, but not really for the sake of arguing with non-believers, but for encouraging and directing believers. And so we're left with this big problem. Is apologetics necessary? What is being done from that? What good is coming from this? So the heart of this issue as to why I would ask such a ridiculous question is, well, first off, because of social media debates. If you go on YouTube, for instance, you'll see maybe a famous argument from Richard Dawkins. And then you'll see all the atheists saying, Christians are so dumb. And then you'll see, maybe Norman Geisler or something, and all the Christians will be saying, yeah, atheists are so dumb. And so you have all this happen. And so then you have people who go on, and they go on just to argue. That's it. There's no desire to learn or grow. Hey, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I'm thinking wrong. No, forget all that. Forget about it. I just want to argue. And it's like, okay, so you don't want to learn or grow? No, don't do that. And I'm not just talking about atheists here. Christians do it too. It's like they go on to other people's, they go onto a video that they know is going to be infested with the other side. And then they just sit there and argue with them like needlessly over and over and over again. And they have the same arguments that they go through, and there's no desire to try to grow or learn or anything. Nobody wants to know what the truth is. They just want to yell their opinion louder than the other person. So it's what happens, and what has happened here is social media debates are the place where nobody really wins. But somehow the person is always convinced, yeah, that other side lost. Okay. Right, okay. And what should be alarming to most Christians that isn't, is that I have yet to see anybody change their mind or accept the Christian faith from a YouTube comment section. You would think that would be alarming and would be kind of maybe a red flag that something's wrong there, and yet for most Christians it isn't. So the real heart of the issue here is no opinions are changed, and yet they arm themselves for war. Well, I read this book, and now because I read this one book, I'm a master of the topic, and I know all things, and I'm going to regurgitate it to you. You see, a lot of people do this on both sides. So once again, I'm not picking on atheists. I'm picking on everybody who does this. And then what makes it even worse for Christians to practice the art of apologetics is that it's coupled with bad attitudes. Let me list some of them. Arrogance. I know everything. You're such an idiot. Here's another one. Lack of love. They're there for self-serving ends, to make themselves feel better about what they believe. That's it. That doesn't matter about the other person. It doesn't matter about, actually genuinely answering a genuine answer. Nobody wants to act civil, but everybody wants to be right. And it's like, people aren't going to listen to you if you don't actually care for them. That's just a trait of humanity. You know what I mean? This is why politicians get elected, because whoever lies the best convinces me that they care, and then I vote for them, and then they don't keep any of their promises because they don't really care. So this is exactly what happens with apologetics. But here's another problem that comes up with the study of apologetics, is that unfortunately this circle of despair, I guess, verbal jousting rhetoric, the circle of rhetoric, let's call it that, discourages real ministry. It makes it where, oh, I have a ministry It's called arguing on YouTube. Okay, I guess you could say that. It's not true. You're not doing anybody any good. But I mean, hey, whatever makes you feel better about yourself. And then also it preoccupies Christians with arguments with people who don't actually care, and causes them to ignore and not have time for those who do want to know. So it kind of causes more problems than it resolves. And then there's this, which is a very important issue that I just want to throw it out there. This video is not meant for atheists, so I'm not really going to defend this point, but it is a very, very valuable point anyways. The belief in God is something that is inherent in humans. Some people have the idea that somehow we'll evolve past that. That's simply not true. It's just something that's inherent in us. Okay, so if that's true, now let's take the next sentence or the next, it's not a sentence, a clause. Atheism is a result of the religious and the hurt. Okay, so let me just kind of elaborate on that. What I've found in arguing with atheists is that they don't actually care about the answers to most of their questions. It's true. And so they'll, it seems like their problem really isn't with God or with the supernatural or anything like that, really. It's just a natural part of who we are. Like, oh, I'm a skeptic. And no, not really. The real problem is, and this is kind of an important problem that Christians too often ignore, is that atheism is not inherent in our human nature. It's not something that, it's just who we are. No, it's a result of dealing with religious people, or a really hurtful situation, death of a loved one, for instance, and those times when the church could have been the hands and feet of God to that person, and yet they weren't. So that's just something for my Christian friends to think about. And here's just a point here. You see Christians talking a lot about, their love for God and how they love learning about the Bible and all this stuff. And my dog loves to, when I'm recording a video, she loves to sit, to go and do something that makes a lot of noise. It doesn't matter what it is. She's just an attention hog. Yeah, I'm talking about you. And then she pretends like she didn't do anything. Then I look at her. Then I look away and she goes. Anyways, here's just a point of order for my Christian friends here who hopefully are watching this, is if you really want to do something, some good, address this issue, spend more time loving people and acting more like Jesus, and you wouldn't have to argue so much online. Okay? What I hear Christians talk about often, which is very unfortunate, is, I love God and I love it. But loving God is loving people, and they want to make a distinction there. I have the gift of knowing a lot of things and speaking as hatefully and quickly online as possible. Okay, but the Bible says that if you claim to love God and yet don't love people, then you're a liar. Well, I don't really want to get involved in ministry. I don't really like people. Okay, so we're not reading the same Bible, evidently. And so oftentimes what happens is apologetics becomes kind of like a distraction from a bigger issue for Christians. And that's really the heart of the issue of apologetics. So I'll go back to my question again. Is apologetics really necessary? Well, let's unravel deeper. Well, there's a few further problems with this before we can even think of beginning an answer, and that's with the people who we are arguing with. See, the answers to all these questions that they're asking on the YouTube comments and on the Facebook pages and all that stuff is the answers already exist out there. It's not like this is something new. This isn't like some new knowledge. but they won't read them. They read the books that verify their opinion, which is also something that you as a Christian need to watch out for. Watch out for just reading things that just tickle the way you already want to believe and then just kind of throw away everything else. There comes a point when you have to say, no, I want to know what's true, not what I want to know. And so, I mean, maybe before you get too irritated with atheists doing this, maybe you ought to think about, I don't know, fixing it in you. I'm just throwing that out there. If the answers are out there in a book somewhere and they're not reading them, you have to figure out maybe they don't really want to know the answer. I mean, think, for instance, why are you not reading the atheist books? Or maybe you are and you just make a full-time job out of this, in which case it might just be better to get a life. I mean, I don't want to sound too harsh, but goodness sakes. Even if you give all the answers, they will still go again and again and again. Out of all the arguments that I've had online with atheists, it may start with one issue, but the instant that you give the answer, they'll go to another issue. It's like, but this is what we're talking about. This. Well, it's like, well, trying to keep them on topic is just out of the question. Why? Because I really don't think it's about the questions. If they genuinely do want to know an answer, the problem is that having the answer isn't good enough, because their issue is between them and God, as caused by a religious person who mistreated them. See what I mean? So they're having to work through something that's on a whole nother emotional level. And so there's that. Accepting the reality of God would be would be a direct conflict with the core of their belief system. I mean, you have to kind of tread lightly. So don't take it personal. It's just this kind of thing isn't really working for evangelism. It's like this. Okay, I'm going to go out on my road bike and I'm going to go out on a dirt trail. Well, that's not really going to work. I mean, I can't get offended at my bike for braking when I do that. I misused it. And that's exactly what's happening here. You can't get offended because you went about something the wrong way and it didn't work. The people who argue on places like YouTube and Facebook, their desire really isn't to learn. They go on a video that affirms their beliefs, and then they take that knowledge and they go and fling it at somebody else so that they can win an argument. Okay. See what I mean? The point is in arguing. The problem is that this is not an atheist trait. This should be an atheist trait, but it's not an atheist trait. You see Christians doing the same thing. They just want to win an argument. They want to prove how smart they are. They want to, and it's like, that's not what you see Jesus doing. It's just something that it would be a lot easier to have conversations with atheists if Christians wouldn't continually shoot themselves in the foot. But then there's another issue, and that is that God has to reveal himself. And the problem is that a lot of Christians take this as a point of pride. See, I'm so much better than you because I have understanding. Get over yourself. I mean, goodness sakes. Being a Christian is supposed to be, following Jesus, and not supposed to be, whatever that ugliness is. It is true, though, that God has to open our hearts to receive something, and just because somebody's not there now doesn't mean that they never will be. But with that being said, it comes a point when if somebody is not ready to accept something, you cannot force it on them. Like, for instance, let me give you a good example. This isn't just about religious belief. This is about anything in life. If you're talking with an addict, okay, and you can give all the good arguments, you can talk till you're blue in the face, you can give them opportunity, but until they're ready to take that step, you're just spinning your tires. It's not achieving anything. It's not producing a lasting result. They have to make the decision. And it's the same thing here. You cannot make somebody believe something. You can't argue somebody into heaven. It has to be a point where they accept it. And here's the thing. God will reveal himself to anybody. Really. But the problem is, a lot of times he won't, where there's, a hard heart where somebody's not willing to. Like, for instance, you take for instance the account in Exodus of the Exodus. It says that the Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and then it says that God hardened his heart. Well, which is it? Well, see, because Pharaoh hardened his heart, God used that to bring glory to himself and to liberate Israel. So, yes. And that's kind of something hard to think about, because that's a very, very complicated philosophical issue, and I don't really have time to get into it in this video. But for the sake of the video, I'm just drawing attention to it, not really going to elaborate too much on it. Then there's the issue that most people on the comment section are just trolling you. You have to come to a point of accepting that and moving on. Not every time that somebody invites you to arguments, you have to agree with them. You don't always have to join an argument that somebody else starts. And just because somebody says something doesn't mean that you have to say something back. You don't always have to talk. There is a point where the Bible says this: in the abundance of words, foolishness is just going to happen. And then it says this: if a foolish person keeps his mouth shut, people will think that he's smart. And I think that maybe Christians could learn from that. But the Bible also says that wise people make wisdom acceptable. They make it easy for people to accept. Just some thoughts here. So what are some positive outcomes about apologetics? I've made it pretty clear all the problems that are inherent, especially in social media apologetics. Oh my goodness. So there are nevertheless some good sides of this. See, told you. She hates when I'm doing something on my computer and not giving her attention. She's like a cat. She's like a cat. Cat dog. Cat dog. Okay, so some positive outcomes here. First off, strengthened faith. Apologetics does a lot for people who they have answers. You don't know how many people I've seen who just got mad because the church said, well, it's in the Bible, so you just need to believe it, without giving like a, well, can you explain that though? So, and then what makes it worse are these real dogmatic old-time preachers who are like, "Thus saith God," but it's not really something that God actually necessarily says, or it's something where they're just misunderstanding it and so they misteach it. Oh, enter the debate between science and religion that doesn't even need to exist. Anyways, and so because the questions aren't answered, people get frustrated and they either leave the church or they just say, faith doesn't really have anything to do with my life. I mean, you look at COVID, for instance. Stay there. Yeah, I've got my eye on you still. Look at COVID, for instance. There were a bunch of people who were going to church that called themselves Christians, but they were very nominal Christians. I mean, they didn't really serve anybody. They didn't really love anybody. They just kind of went to church once a week and read their Bible on occasion, and that somehow made them super duper righteous, way better than you at least, you know. And the problem with that is that, well, everything with it. And so then COVID hit and churches closed. And they got out of church and they said, I don't need to go back because it didn't really apply to my life. It was just kind of a waste of time. Because they weren't really saved to Jesus. They were saved to a tradition, the American tradition. And, they liked Jesus looking more like John Wayne than like the servant dying on a cross that he was. So another positive outcome besides strengthening faith is one-on-one evangelism. There's going to be times when you're talking to somebody and they have genuine concerns, and it would be nice to have the answers. And if you don't have the answers, to be able to say, let me look that up, and then actually be able to look it up. So another good outcome. Number 3, knowing why you believe and what you believe, rather than following a combination of man-made traditions and correct things mushed together. It's important to stop and say, now, is this true? Like, you know what I mean? There should be a point where you question your beliefs and you challenge yourself, because even if you believe in the truth, there's going to be an element in your brain that latches onto something that's not the truth and kind of just pushes it in with the truth. And if you're not analyzing what you're believing, not to say that you can't have knowledge and that all truth is relative. That's not what I'm saying. But remember that our own bias will insert things in there that's not really there. For instance, look at the last election, President Biden, where conservative Christians, oh boy, they were able to take Christianity and somehow include it with Trumpism and nationalism, and it was just nasty. The whole thing was just screwed up. So anyways, know what you believe and why you believe, rather than just simply grasping onto things. And this should be something that always challenges. Is pacifism biblical? If a civil war is going to happen, what side should I be on, or should I not be on a side? See what I mean? Like, these are important issues that are going to be challenged, and so it's kind of worth thinking about. So if you are going to do apologetics, especially in an online environment, here's the thing. If you want to give an answer, absolutely give an answer. But here's the thing. Don't think that you are going to choose somebody's beliefs for them. Don't think that you will single-handedly persuade them. Don't think that they're your enemy. They're not your enemy. And then don't get in arguments just for the sake of arguing or just for the sake of winning. There has to be something else at play there. So let me just take this to the next thing, arguing with atheists. Now, this is something that I'm using as an example to show the limitations of apologetics. I am not trying to say, look at how stupid atheists are, but just roll with me on this, okay? I have had many encounters with atheists online, and oh boy, it just never goes good. I mean, you can literally give... here's a good example. There was one guy who posted, and he starts arguing exactly what I already explained in my video. And then he starts critiquing the video, saying all the things that's wrong with it, even though it gave all the answers he was looking for. So I was like, okay. So I explained to him the things that he had a problem with. And one thing he kept coming back to is he didn't understand semantic range. So in translations... there's something called semantic range. So basically what that means is one word doesn't necessarily have one equivalent. A word has a range of meaning. A good example being in Greek, which the New Testament was written in Greek. There's something called the definite article, ha, he, ta, the masculine, feminine, neuter. But the problem is that it doesn't always translate as the definite article, the. Sometimes it's not translated at all. This has to do more with grammatical issues. I won't bore you with the details. Sometimes it's translated as a pronoun. I mean, it just has a lot of different functions. So what does that Greek word mean, ha? What does it mean? Well, it really depends on the context. There's a semantic range, a range of possibility of what something can mean. And he didn't understand this. So I was trying to show him how semantic range worked, and it got me off a little bit on a sidetrack because the answer was already in the video, and he thought that I was disagreeing with what I said in the video, and it was like, so I was trying to explain it, but man, oh man, I answered all of his other questions, but this one question he just wouldn't get past. So I was like, okay, all right, so I tried 50 different ways, and then I started realizing that he was actually just trying to troll and keep the argument going. He wasn't actually trying to. He had already come to the conclusion I was wrong before he even started commenting on the video. So then when I gave him all the answers, it really wasn't good enough. I mean, and then here's a good example. That same video, somebody else commented, and they're all like, what is it that they said? That what you said in this video, that's the last thing you want to tell somebody. And it's like, I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm trying to teach you about historically how people wrote back then. That's people thought differently back then too. Bringing that to light isn't going to win an argument or not win. It's a historical fact. See what I mean? And so you have to accept history on its own terms. But regardless, that's not something. I saw the comment and I was like, I could argue with this, but what's the point? He has no understanding of history. He doesn't want to have an understanding of history. He just wants to disprove what I said. So what's the point? I mean, honestly, people will disrespect you online, and it's just kind of, what's the point of going with it? So he brings up the first guy that I was mentioning, he brings up this this online lexicon tool that, I mean, if you know anything about languages, not all lexicons are equal. So then I used a Hebrew lexicon that is kind of like the top notch. It's I think it's called BDAG. It's hidden by some books that I have piled, but I believe it's BDAG, or BBG, or no, I think it's BDAG. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. It's a lexicon. That's long story short. It's a Hebrew lexicon, and so then after giving them that, then it just caused the problem to go worse, and he just kept trying to misquote me on what I said. And after 5 or 6 times of rewording it, like no, that's not what I said. I said this, and he. What are you gonna do? Just sit there arguing all day? And here's the thing: some people do that. Some people legitimately do that. They go on and they just argue all day, and it's like, don't you have anything better to do with your time? And I'm not just talking about atheists here. I'm talking about Christians too. Like, don't you have something better to do? Like, this video is not intended for atheists. This video is intended for Christians, because I want to genuinely challenge the idea of, is apologetics actually accomplishing anything? Is anything good actually coming from it? Is there a point when, okay, here's this knowledge and somebody's life has changed, or is it just a thing of, wow, now I feel better about what I already believed, now let me try and cram it down somebody else's throat? And anyways, so the first thing that you see all the time in these stupid online debates is the atheists will inevitably say, this is a fallacy, and this is a fallacy, and this is a fallacy. And here's the thing. Sometimes they are really fallacies. Sometimes they're not really fallacies, just that they misquoted it as a fallacy. It doesn't really matter. And so then this kind of starts this whole spiral where they say, well, this is a fallacy, so therefore I'm just going to ignore it because they're obviously stupid. First off, there's no effort being done about, well, this must be what they mean, or, hey, let's reword this where it's not a fallacy and then I'll combat the idea, or, okay, so it's a fallacy, what makes it not true? See, there's this idea that atheists love throwing around where they just study all the different logical fallacies and they memorize them, and then they throw them around in arguments, and it's like, okay. And the problem is that Christians still fall for it over and over and over again. But this is actually a fallacy in and of itself, called the fallacy. Basically, it says that if you can't discredit somebody's argument just because it had a logical fallacy in it. You can't come to the conclusion, therefore they are wrong, just because they had a fallacy in it. So, I mean, kind of an important issue. Another big thing that you're going to run into when you're arguing online with atheists, which is another big reason why you don't want to go here. Scientism. Basically, it's the idea that science can answer all questions. The belief is in science. Everything that is knowable through science. But science has massive gaps. It's almost worthless when it comes to philosophical issues. When it comes to anything, science really has a limited basis. Science can tell us things about what is observable and therefore repeatable. Science can never disprove supernatural occurrences. It can never prove supernatural occurrences. It just has a very limited thing. And when you treat science like religion, it kind of just is self-defeating, because you say, oh, Christians are so stupid. Here, let me tell you about the book of Darwin. And it's like, oh. So, massive, oh my goodness. I almost saw outside my window a diesel almost just plowed into another diesel. Ooh, boy, that was close. Anyways, another one, the straw man fallacy. They love this one. They'll misquote you. They'll reword it. All these different things and make it sound like, well, that's stupid. And it's like, well, that's not actually what I said. But they'll catch you off guard and they'll say it so rapidly that it's like, wait, that's not what I said. So the big problem here, besides, well, going back to the straw man, sometimes they'll very slightly misquote what you say just slightly taint it, or they'll draw a false conclusion, like, oh, you said this, that means this. And it's like, well, no, that's not what that means. And the problem is that you have to analyze every single thing that's being said before you progress in the argument, because if you don't bring it up at that time, it'll be an assumed truth. And then, see what I mean? The point being this. Or do you really think that you're going to do any good by arguing? Or you really think you're going to do any good by giving an answer? Proverbs says this. Now, I'm not saying atheists are stupid. Okay? In the Bible, wisdom is not just knowing things and being smart. Wisdom doesn't just come with age in the Bible. Wisdom is about, it says that wisdom is the fear of the Lord. Now, why is that? Because if you don't fear God, there's no reason to do what you do. Oh, well, this is right and this is wrong. Says who? Without the fear of the Lord, it's nothing but your own personal whims. Well, I think that, so who cares? Why should I be held to your, so you want to be held to your standard, but then you want other people to be held by your standard. So what's the point of that? And it's just a big, so oftentimes what I see happen is that people will have just enough knowledge to argue their point. Maybe they'll read one history book by a guy that isn't really, is kind of like really anti-God or something, and so they'll say, oh, this is how things are. It's like, well, not really. And yeah, anyways. And then there's some things that have been disproven that are still clung to. Like, for instance, if you're familiar with the study of the Old Testament, there's this belief called JEDP, where basically the Old Testament law is a conglomeration of these four different traditions. And it really just doesn't hold up. There's no proof of that ever existing. The supposed parts are so mingled that they're like impossible to even find if they were even hypothetically there in the first place. Stuff like that. So here's a good example of one that I deal with agonizingly often. I don't know how archaeology works or how limited it is, or the things that can't really be known through it. But the lack of evidence of an Exodus proves that there was no Exodus. And it's like, what? First off, like, what? Archaeology has revealed surprisingly small amounts of data. Of all that's knowable, we know very small amounts. And in that ignorance, people are making direct claims about what is and what isn't. It's like, well, now hold on. The lack of evidence with archaeology is not the evidence of nothing being there. Those are two completely different things. And be careful of arguments of silence. Well, it doesn't say this. Well, yeah, but it doesn't say that either. See what I mean? So maybe just limit that kind of nonsense. It really irritates me when people don't know anything about archaeology or history, but yet they use it to claim so voraciously that the Bible is inaccurate and God is proven false by archaeology or something. It's like, what? Here's another example. I don't know how history works, but because they wrote how people wrote back then, that disproves it. So you want people back then to have written the same way as now. I was talking with one guy, and his big riff with the Bible was that it was in poetical form rather than in dry statistical scientific facts. And I told him, do you honestly believe that you have full knowledge in scientific facts? Or do you wish that humans didn't have emotive language? What are you getting at here? Like, you don't understand the difference between a metaphor and a fact? Like, I don't understand that. And anyways, this kind of nonsense. And once again, you're not really going to change any opinions. You're not really going to prove a point. So what is the point of continuing the argument over and over and over again? Like, there's no point. Apologetics has a very limited value. And I'm not trying to discredit that or the people who write those books, but to try and push that limited value to areas that it really doesn't have value, it's like, why? Why? Yeah, or here, I already told this story, but, hey, I looked up a lexicon online, and so this word means that every single time, and I have full knowledge of the language that I know nothing about. Okay. Then there's this is not an atheist trait. This is a human trait. You see Christians doing it all the time. They'll read the Bible and it'll bring up a very complicated issue and they'll just dismiss it out of hand. Well, this is what was meant. And it's like, well, the Bible obviously didn't give you an answer there because it was kind of trying to encourage thought. So maybe instead of just dismissing it, you should actually exhibit thought to the argument. And unfortunately, this happens in atheism all the time too. People will just completely dismiss a very difficult concept. Like, for instance, a very difficult concept. How did life spawn from lack of life, and how did consciousness spawn from no consciousness? Like, what happened there? How come everything has these guiding principles and laws to it? How come morality developed? And these things don't have clear answers, but they give these really just real rushed, dismissive conclusions, like this. Well, morality is because it was an evolved trait because people work together or something like that. And it's like, what? What? In no way is that even true. It's excessively naive, and it's not true. It's like people don't work together. Even now, people don't work together. So under your reasoning, people should become more evolved in that aspect, but they're not. See, I mean, that's a very difficult concept, and you can't just dismiss it. But in these pointless arguments that we're getting sucked into, that's exactly what's happening. There's a very complicated issue, and that's just stupid. And so you go and watch these atheist videos where they just dismiss things. DNA is a language in our body. Only intelligence creates intelligence. Order does not come from chaos. Things don't just randomly appear. Everything that has a cause, everything that began to exist has a cause. So what? See what I mean? Like, these are things that are very difficult concepts, but are just flippantly dismissed. And it's the same thing over and over again. They'll act real calm and like, oh, Christianity is real stupid. And that's the part that gets you every single time. You're going to go on, you're going to, oh, well, my beliefs aren't stupid, their beliefs are stupid. And it's like, just let it go. Maybe don't go on if you can't handle it, don't go on the video in the first place. Just throwing that out there. And then after they've antagonized you by talking down, then they'll bring up these, oh, reason. And it's like, it's unreasonable to believe that something came out of nothing and then ordered itself and then spawned life. Like, that's unreasonable. Anyways. And then after they do that, they'll bring up the thing about fallacies. They love bringing up the thing about fallacies. And unfortunately, too many Christians do, and religious people in general, do argue religious. Here's a good one that is actually a legitimate problem. This had to have a God, therefore my God is the God. Why is your God the right answer? That's something that the religious person should be prepared to answer. Now, obviously, Christians have a little bit of a one-up on, for instance, Hindu, because you've got Yahweh, who is an immaterial being, timeless and all-powerful, and so that kind of fits the scientific requirements for a god. And so they kind of have the stronger argument, although Muslims could claim the same thing with Allah. So you kind of have to go a whole thing about revelation. Well, is one right? Are they both right? Are they the same God? Are they not? See what I mean? So you have this huge issue there, but you get my point. Yeah. So okay. Expect for these things to happen. And this is something that is a human trait, not an atheist trait. So I want to bring this up again. Bias will always blind belief. What you want to believe will always have the final word over the intake of information that you have. I don't argue anymore on my videos. I say what I'm going to say, and then I move on. It's just back and forth. It's a waste of my time. I have 5 kids. It's hard to deal with that kind of a situation, and then pastor and then lead worship and all these different things and write a book and all this different stuff. It's just a waste of time. So don't think just because somebody doesn't answer on a video that they're wrong or they've given in or some stupid stuff like that. Don't think that I don't have an answer for something. I just if something is actually a good point, most people will just say these cliche bottled things, but sometimes people will actually see something that's a good point, and if they do, what I do is I usually just create a whole video for it. And there's that. It's just an easier solution. So I want to just kind of warn you here. As I've shown here, the typical format, this comes from much research and arguing with atheists. You can see it's pretty much a waste of time. Because if somebody has already chosen to believe something, your argument is not going to do anything. And remember that the main course of the argument is because Christians weren't acting like Christians in the first place. So, before you get all irritated and bent out of shape about all these things, remember what I just told you about arguing with atheists online. It's just not really going to go anywhere. It's not really going to change any opinions. It's not going to do anybody any good. Maybe if you want to say something where you explain a point, maybe create your own video. Hey, there's an idea. But to go and take to the YouTube comments. It's just kind of like kind of a waste of time. Just throwing that out there. And also, don't forget that people will oftentimes claim facts that don't exist. Oh, well, this is true. And it's like, well, not really. You got to be smarter than being trolled. So I hope that this was helpful. My main conclusion from all of this is that apologetics is necessary, but it needs to be used carefully, because Christians can get sucked into pointless arguments and debates with bad attitudes rather than actually helping people. So, okay.